Oh God, Dane.
I have beaten a lot of RPGs, and I'm talking about playing hundreds of titles from beginning to end. I haven't just beaten these games, I've also documented the date, hours played, and my own personal thoughts and ratings of every title on a spreadsheet for fun. Needless to say, I love this genre, and today I thought I might make a guide for newcomers and veterans alike. In this video, I'll be going through the different levels of difficulty in RPGs, starting with beginner, then intermediate, advanced, and finally the master class. I won't just be going over turn-based RPGs, but the other two subgenres of action RPG and tactical RPG as well. All three will be treated as their own category. This means I will have 3 recommended titles per difficulty level. My goal is to lay out a roadmap of recommended games based on their difficulty, and which make for great entry points into the genre. So if you're a beginner of tactical RPGs but a veteran of turn-based, or you've only exclusively played action RPGs but have not played tactical or turn-based, this video will have suggestions for any and all players. Now, I'm not going to waste time defining what an RPG is because the definition itself seems impossible. I'll just quote Justin Potter Stewart, who when asked to define photography said, "I know it when I see it." If you're new to the channel, subscribe and become a member of the Low Cloud Aim family today. Also, be sure to check out our perks for Patreon members by clicking on the link below. Where to start with any type of RPG is an interesting question. Jumping into such an unfamiliar genre can be overwhelming, and what you choose to play first can shape your entire opinion moving forward. Start with something complex and built for veterans, and you might walk away thinking that this genre is made of psychopaths who live in their mother's basement, which, I don't know, might be true. Either way, this first step is the most important, so I'm going to spend a good amount of time here. Let's start with the turn-based RPG. Turn-based RPGs usually have a battle system built upon turn order, decision-making, and the weighing of cost versus reward. The challenge and subsequent payoff of this subgenre is making choices that put you at an advantage over your opponent. This is done both in battle via commands and out of battle via builds, equipment, and party choice. If you are going to enjoy this genre, just know that making poor choices is a part of the fun, and nothing in the beginner tier will ultimately punish you for your decisions. Now, when it comes to which game is the perfect entry point for turn-based RPGs, you actually have a lot of choices. Paper Mario, which was originally released on the N64, instantly comes to mind. This isn't only a perfect entry point because of its easily accessible battle system and simple yet addictive progression, but it's also in the familiar world of Nintendo's most popular IP, Super Mario Bros. The Mario & Luigi series and Mario RPG are 2 other great recommendations to beginners for the same reason. All of these games are available on current platforms. I also consider Golden Sun a GBA classic which is welcoming to both beginners and veterans alike. But after my most recent playthrough, I felt that the vague puzzles and unclear progression might throw some players off. Another RPG of note is Undertale, which is incredibly accessible to newcomers of the genre. The only problem here is that Undertale seeks to subvert the genre, and players unfamiliar with RPGs might find it a poor representation. What I finally landed on as my choice for the beginner level of turn-based RPGs was the Pokemon series. This is not only the perfect entry point into the genre, but it also happens to be the most popular by sheer data. Pokemon is the single most recognizable IP in the entire world, and for good reason. These games are a delight to experience, and depending on where you jump in, they have a little bit of something for everyone. If you have never played a Pokemon title, I would suggest picking up Pokemon Brilliant Diamond or Shining Pearl for the Switch. This is the 4th generation of Pokemon and seems to be a good compromise between the old and the new. From there, you can pretty much play any other title you like in the series. Don't skip the original Game Boy and Game Boy Advance titles though. You'll be doing yourself a disservice. Now let's move on to the action RPG. This genre is a blend of action gameplay and RPG mechanics. These titles usually focus in on a player's equipment and moveset in battle. Party members sometimes come into the mix, but most times you'll be controlling a single character while the AI makes decisions for your party. Of all the genres, this one is the most diverse, with its own subgenres attached to it. The choice here was easy. For a short minute, I considered a few titles. If you're a veteran of first-person shooters, then Borderlands 2 is a must. Its RPG mechanics are light, as it leans heavily on the shooting mechanic. There are also some easily accessible titles like Dragon's Crown, which is a brawler with a leveling and class mechanic. Also, if you're familiar with the Legend of Zelda series, Okami has much of what made those games so addicting, with some RPG elements thrown into the mix. But at the end of the day, the title I feel is the best starting point into the action RPG genre is Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is a marriage between Disney and Square Enix, which works perfectly for those unfamiliar with the latter. Seeing legacy Disney characters alongside some of the most influential RPG characters seems like a no-brainer. The combat in Kingdom Hearts is simple, with a single attack, jump, and optional dodge mechanic available along with spells and summons. If you are going to play Kingdom Hearts, I'd recommend going in release order. I think trying to play chronologically, according to the story, will only serve to confuse the player. The first title has the tightest narrative and leans heavily into the Disney aspect, which is perfect for newcomers. The final subgenre is the tactical RPG. Now, out of all the subgenres, this is the most difficult to get into. It also happens to be one of the most challenging in the latter difficulties. I really had to rack my brain here, as entering this genre can be intimidating and can easily become a turnoff for newcomers. I went through a few candidates. Final Fantasy Tactics on the GBA is a simplified version of its predecessor and isn't too hard to understand going in fresh. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is more a visual novel with some tower defense mechanics thrown in. I nearly recommended this title as it is an absolute gem. But as far as introducing a player to the TRPG, I wasn't convinced it could do the job. What I ended up on was the recently released Switch title, Mario Rabbids. This, once again, calls upon the familiar world of Mario to introduce the player to top-notch tactical gameplay. It's addicting, colorful, hilarious at times, and though it's challenging, I don't think someone unfamiliar with tactical RPGs will struggle for too long. So to summarize the beginner level, for turn-based we have the Pokemon series, for action RPGs we have Kingdom Hearts, and for tactical RPGs we have Mario Rabbids. If you want to begin your RPG journey, I'd start here. The intermediate class is going to vary from subgenre to subgenre. We'll start with the turn-based games first. Once you've broken into turn-based RPGs and got an idea of how they work, the genre is surprisingly accessible. At this point, there are very few games you can enjoy. This is where the bulk of the classics could be recommended. Games like Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest VIII, Legend of Dragoon, or Earthbound would all be good recommendations. But now that you're here in the intermediate level, I would suggest the Final Fantasy series. Now, there are a lot to choose from, and not all of them are turn-based. Of the first mainline titles, the only ones I wouldn't recommend at this level would be Final Fantasy 1 through 3, 8, 12, or 13 for various reasons. Now, if I had to pick one to sum up the intermediate turn-based RPG, it would have to be Final Fantasy 9. 9 has a fairly linear progression that won't leave the player scratching their heads. It does a good job walking you through its mechanics, and it doesn't have any harsh difficulty spikes. The world is colorful and the characters are incredibly memorable. Also, of all the older titles, the art style of this game has aged the best. After you've beaten that, I'd suggest moving on to Final Fantasy 6, 7, and 10 in no particular order. Moving on to the intermediate action RPG, this is where things get a little tricky. If you are familiar with third-person shooters, then the Mass Effect trilogy is a must-play. The story is engrossing and similar to Borderlands, the RPG elements are much lighter than a traditional RPG. E7 is an underappreciated title with an addicting gameplay loop and engrossing action combat. In fact, the Ys series as a whole is a great jumping in point for the intermediate action RPG. A few other contenders were the recently released Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as well as the GBA masterpiece, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, or its PS1 inspiration, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Oh, I would also be disappointing a lot of fans if I didn't mention the Tales series. Specifically Tales of Vesperia and Tales of the Abyss, which boast a fun, slightly advanced action battle system. But to be honest, there are too many great options to choose from. But at this point in your journey, I think it's most important that you get introduced to the Soulsborne subgenre of the subgenre of action RPGs. Soulsborne is a phrase adopted from the game industry-changing titles Dark Souls and Bloodborne. These two games transformed how people view action RPGs and, well, RPGs as a whole. There is no better introduction to this subgenre than the stellar Star Wars titles Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. These games do a great job at giving the player an intermediate look into the Souls-like gameplay with its unique difficulty, checkpoint system, and intense battles. Seeing as Star Wars is immensely popular, I don't see how this isn't the best place to jump in and experience two amazing action RPGs. And finally, let's move on to the intermediate tactical RPG. Now this one is without doubt the easiest to assign. I considered Final Fantasy Tactics, the title that popularized this subgenre in the West, but after playing it, I realized that it's more of an advanced title than an intermediate one. Then my mind fell on one of the most beloved tactical RPGs to ever be released, Disgaea. Disgaea is the perfect playground for any intermediate player of tactical RPGs. Not only does it introduce you to some of the complexities of the genre, but it also provides a safe space to make mistakes and experience why so many people love this series. You are never exclusively punished in Disgaea, as the game wants you to try pretty much every wacky idea you can come up with. And if you manage to find one of its grindy loopholes, you can easily become overleveled to the point of comedy. This title will keep you busy for hours, and as a consequence, you will become a better player, which is always the goal. So to review the intermediate level, for turn-based RPGs, you have Final Fantasy IX, or pretty much the entire Final Fantasy series. For action RPGs, you have Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. And for tactical RPGs, you have the Disgaea series. specifically Disgaea 1 Complete. The professional class of difficulty is where many are going to be scratching their heads. At this point in your RPG journey, challenges will be hard to find. A player will see that if they want to continue searching out new experiences, they're gonna have to get creative. But hey, creativity is the reason we like this genre. So let's start with the professional tier of turn-based RPGs. First, I have to say that though I did not pick it, the Persona series belongs here and should be experienced by everyone. Persona 5 Royal is the most popular and is an absolute banger of a game, though I am more partial to Persona 4 Golden on the Switch. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Trails series. These titles are some of my favorite and deserve to be in the professional tier if you're playing on Nightmare difficulty. This difficulty setting demands that the player understands the mechanics in order to advance. There are multiple jumping in points. Trails of Cold Steel and Trails Through Daybreak are probably the two best. Anyway, there are so many more, but the title I would recommend to the professional turn-based RPG enthusiast is a series near and dear to my heart. And that series is Xenoblade Chronicles. The Xenoblade titles don't hold back when it comes to complex mechanics, and I wouldn't recommend them to anyone who didn't have a grasp on the genre. But seeing as we're now talking about the second to last tier, I feel that players should be ready to experience this absolute classic. I think starting from the beginning is best. Xenoblade 1 is far less complicated than Xenoblade 2 and 3. Although if the anime style doesn't do it for you, then Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition will be available on the Switch. All in all, I don't think any advanced RPG fans should skip out on the Xenoblade series. Now, as for advanced action RPGs, a player should never skip on Skyrim, which will go down as one of the greatest RPGs ever made. Its gameplay is addicting and its world is incredibly vast. This title has so much replayability that one could spend years playing it and experience something different every time. Unfortunately, this is not the title I picked for this category. Nier Automata is another noteworthy title which expertly blends multiple genres into one, the action RPG being the most prominent. Nier Automata is one of those titles you can only experience once, but if you play all the way through to the end, there's an unforgettable experience waiting for you. Unfortunately, this is also not the title I picked for this category. Nope, the title I picked as the game to play on the professional action RPG category is Elden Ring. Elden Ring, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, is one of gaming's greatest achievements. It's a much easier title than many of the other Soulsborne games, like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, as it's much easier to get ahead of the power curve. All it takes is finding the right equipment and a few spells, and you won't have much trouble. Now, that doesn't mean it isn't challenging. If you're setting off to experience everything Elden Ring has to offer, then you are in for an unforgettable experience, one that I recommend to everyone who has reached this point in their RPG journey. Now, at this point, every single tactical RPG player should play Final Fantasy Tactics. In fact, if you've done that, then 99% of the tactical RPG subgenre is open to you. A player shouldn't pass up on titles such as Unicorn Overlord, which is one of my personal favorites, or the Valkyrie Chronicles series, or most importantly, the Fire Emblem series, specifically Path of Radiance, Awakening, and Three Houses. And of course, the underappreciated Tactics Ogre series should be in there as well. But before you play any of those, make sure to play Final Fantasy Tactics, as it embodies everything that made this genre great. To recap the advanced category, for turn-based RPGs you have the Xenoblade Chronicles series, for action RPGs you have Elden Ring, and for tactical RPGs you have Final Fantasy Tactics. Alright, at this point I'm sure the veterans of my channel are waiting to see the wrong answer for the master class of RPGs. And to be honest, at first I wasn't sure what I would put here. What are the most difficult RPGs of each genre? For turn-based, I first thought of the Shin Megami series, specifically Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. There's also Fear and Hunger, an indie turn-based RPG that is insanely difficult to beat. For action RPGs, my first thought was Sekiro, an incredibly hard action game that goes light on the RPG elements. And finally, for tactical RPGs, a few came to mind. Fire Emblem Conquest is easily the most difficult Fire Emblem I've ever played. XCOM, Gugner, Natural Doctrine, and Triangle Strategy all pose threats to the player. But in reality, if you've played RPGs up and down and have mastered their systems, then not even these titles will pose a threat. That's when mods and challenges come into play. The hardest games out there are mods and challenges of specific titles. For example, you could always speedrun your favorite game, which will ratchet up the difficulty, or you could download one of the million Kaizo Pokemon mods out there. But here are my recommendations by genre for hardest RPGs in existence. For turn-based, the prize goes to the Final Fantasy X Challenge NSGNSNCNONENNENBB. This stands for no sphere grid, no summons, no customization, no overdrives, no escape, no counters, and no blitzball. For action RPGs, the most difficult challenges out there are usually level 1 runs. Level 1 Kingdom Hearts challenges are pretty popular. So are no leveling runs of any Souls game. But if you really want a challenge, I'd suggest the Sekiro Long May the Shadows Reflect mod. In this mod, all bosses are buffed beyond reason and have different movesets and animations. Additionally, there are around 35 to 40 additional bosses added to the game. This mod has 2 versions. Easy version, which is still really hard, and Hardcore, which is the hardest Sekiro mod and possibly the hardest action RPG mod in existence. For tactical RPGs, I think I'm going to give this one to the absolutely bonkers Fire Emblem Super Thracia mod. This mod turned up the difficulty and AI of the enemies and made decisions have far more consequences than in the original. Overall, it's probably unfair how difficult it is. But hey, that's why we're here. And that's my guide to RPG difficulty. There are too many games to recommend, but if you're new to the genre or looking for your next challenge, these are great places to start. Thank you to all my Patreon members, and if you would like to support this madness while receiving awesome perks, click on the link below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all later. Hey everyone, be sure to check out my reviews of PS2 titles as I go through every single PS2 RPG ever created, and also enjoy this top 10 list. Have fun!